Wow, what great music for the new intro. That is by my good friend Wes Cunningham, no relationship to me. I asked Wes to create some new music. I gave him a song by Tyler Childers called Jersey Giant and some other stuff. And I said, this is how I feel, hopeful, excited about the future, looking forward to meeting some new people, looking forward to building community, building relationships. And I wanted you to bang a guitar. And he did it. So this is season 2 of the mixtape with Scott, and it's great to be back. We have a great lineup of people that are going to be interviewed this year, and the hope is we can do like last season, cram in around 35 episodes, maybe 40, give or take. Before I introduce the guests, I wanted to read a line from a great book by Susan Johnson, book I just read entitled Hold Me Tight, 7 Conversations for a Lifetime of Love. And it goes like this. We use stories to make sense of our lives, and we use stories as models to guide us in the future. We shape stories, and then stories shape us. I could not have said it better myself. That is my entire worldview condensed to 3 short sentences. The ethos of the mixtape is just that. These are the personal stories of economists, scientists, and authors. And as you listen to their stories, the hope is that you hear echoes maybe of your own story. And if we're all lucky, not only will we feel a sense of connection to the interviewee, we may even come away feeling understood and having with us a story that helps us make sense of our own lives, and maybe even a model that helps us guide our historical lives as well. So listen close, open your heart, and be curious as we learn about the life of the one, the only, Dr. Jeffrey Wooldridge, University Distinguished Professor of Economics at Michigan State University, and author of 2 best-selling books in econometrics that have raised a generation of economists, both at the undergrad and at the graduate level. Thanks for tuning in to the Mixtape with Scott Season 2. I'm your host, Scott Cunningham. Okay, well, it is a real pleasure today to have with me a famous person on the podcast, Jeffrey Wooldridge. Jeff, thanks so much for being on the podcast today.
Oh, thanks very much for having me, Scott. I've been looking forward to this.
Well, can you, for the sake of the listeners, say your name, your job title, and who pays you for a living?
Yes, I'm Jeff Wooldridge. I'm at Michigan State University, where I've been a university distinguished professor since, I think, 2001. And I am recently named the Walter Adams Faculty Fellow in Economics. And I teach and do research primarily in econometrics.
Awesome. Well, so before we get into your career, where did you grow up?
I was born and grew up in Concord, California, which is, to put it on the map, it's about 25 miles or so east of Berkeley in the Bay Area in California. So, there are lots of suburbs out there, Concord, Walnut Creek, Lafayette, Pleasant Hill, and so on. And I grew up in one of them during the tail end of the baby boom.
Okay. What did you like to do as a kid? What was it like growing up there?
Let's see, sports were very important in my family's life. So they're starting at an early age. There probably wasn't a season that went by where one wasn't playing, and this is my 2 brothers and we would be playing, football in football season, basketball in basketball season, and baseball in baseball season. So we did a lot of sports in the summers there. It's quite warm. We like to camp out in our yard and, go to the swimming pool and that sort of thing, so standard kids stuff with, and it was, I think at the time when I was really young, we probably would be classified as, lower middle class, something like that.
Okay, cool. What'd your parents do for a living?
So my father initially worked at an oil refinery nearby. And then when I was about 9 years old, he became a California Highway Patrol officer.
Wow.
My parents were divorced when I was really young. So I was 3 years old when they got divorced. And my two brothers and I actually lived with my father, which was probably a bit unusual in the early 1960s. So
Hmm.
we moved with him. He got remarried pretty quickly. And then, although these things are a bit fuzzy in my mind, I was pretty young. So yeah, he became a highway patrol officer. That was most of his working career.
Mm. Mm.
And my mother still still lives in San Francisco, and she worked for different companies as a records management expert. And yeah, she's 83 and lives in San Francisco by herself still.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Was that I mean, what do you know about your dad? Like, was that like his longtime dream to be an officer like that?
Um, you know what? It's kind of interesting. I think he would probably he's passed away now, but I think
Oh.
he wouldn't mind my saying that the way he describes it, he barely made it out of high school, and so he took a job which was a blue collar job, but then he had ambitions, and not just for him but for his children, and so
Mm.
he became I don't really never really sensed that he had this desire to become a law enforcement officer. But when he told us that he had to go away for several months to the academy in Sacramento, I remember being caught off guard a bit, but it seemed like a good thing, and it turned out to be a good thing for him
Yeah.
and for the family as well.
Yeah. Wow. Well, so, growing up, for me, when I think about like the things that when I look back, the things that really gave me a sense of peace kind of growing up was stories, collecting comic books, reading books, going to the library. What was it like for you as a kid? Was it sports or was it something else that
It
you
was,
found?
yeah, it was mostly sports. And to tell you the truth, when back then when I read books, they were often about sports, or
Oh yeah.
or pretty light reading, like the Hardy Boys, or
Yeah.
Nancy Drew or something like that.
Right.
So I can't really claim to have. I think no one would have predicted that I would become an academic back then.
Right. Right.
On the other hand, I think nobody would have predicted that I would become, an NBA basketball player either. So,
Well,
but
what did you want to be? What did you want to be growing up?
yeah, I think I thought, at some point that I would become, some sort of professional athlete, just because kids are irrational, and you have a little bit of success at sports when you're a
Right.
kid, and you have no idea of what the competition is like
Right.
out there. So that, it was probably something mundane like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, not really kind of expanding my opportunities in my own mind at that point.
Right. Right. Well, I mean, teachers, were teachers sort of observing that you had
Oh,
sort of these like skills though, as a
that's really
thoughtful
interesting
person?
question. Yeah, I think the answer is yes, but I mean, I always did well in school, and my brothers did well in school. So my dad, one of the things once he figured out in first, second, third grade that you could do well in school,
Mm,
then it was mandatory that you did well
right.
in school. So there was none of this, you can't handle the work anymore, right?
Yeah.
Even as the work got harder. So I think there was a sense of that, but I will admit that I've never done well on standardized tests, and that would
Mm,
include, I believe, an IQ test. And so I
mm,
remember when I had just started middle school, they wanted me to participate with the gifted kids in some special activities, but they had to get special permission because my IQ wasn't high enough, actually.
oh,
So,
wow, that's funny.
the schools did a really good job, and I thought in Northern California, kind of looking out for the kids, and
Right.
I was one of the fortunate ones.
Well, so did you see, but you did do well. So what, you were sort of just very diligent, hardworking or something like that
I
is
think that's it, actually. I think I was a hard worker. I think I stayed a hard worker through
mm-hmm.
college and graduate school and so on. And
Mm,
so yeah, you can, a lot of and there's something there. there's some level of intelligence there, but I don't think kind of native intelligence, where you can just see a math problem like and solve it in,
Right.
10 seconds, whereas I need to get out the pad and paper and kind of work
Right.
it through, sort of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I might just bring this up now. There's this guy at the University of Chicago, David Galenson. He's like a economic historian, and he studies creativity. And he talks about these like two different types of creative people. And the thing I remember is Jackson Pollock and Andy Warhol, because like from a distance, they like kind of seem like the same type of person. Like they're both kind of doing abstract stuff. But he has this JPE where he analyzed auction prices and on these, and he kind of supports this theory he has, which is that they're very different. There's like one type of creativity that's more of like a returns to experience type. And he said like Pollock, it was like, you don't really know this, but it's like very technical kind of things that he's doing over and
I
over
see.
and over again. And his age earnings profile peaks much later. But like Warhol, he's this other type that's like just this kind of burst of conceptual breakthroughs early.
Right.
And they're both painters, they're both abstract, they're both 20th century. And he said, those are the two different types of creativity. And I just was kind of wondering, what are you?
That's a good question. So as you were talking about that, I was trying to sort out if I could figure out, such as it is. I mean, I suppose I've had a certain kind of creativity, but it's, a lot of it is just a knack maybe for putting things together in a certain way. And I'm not sure, I've written some papers that I'm pretty proud of, not enough of those types of papers, but yeah, I think there is this bit of experience going into it, right? Like you can use that experience to analyze problems from different angles, I think. And if you maybe stare at them from enough different angles, something clicks and you get a new insight. And so you can produce something that may actually look somewhat creative in the end. But maybe but it's not necessarily this kind of aha moment. I feel I've had a few of those, but it's as you were describing these two different types of creativity, it's probably more the experience profile.
More of the Pollock.
Yeah.
Do you think econometrics? Well, then, kind of stepping back, are there econometricians that you would sort of say, well, that's a Andy Warhol type who makes these massive breakthroughs really early, and then there's like Jackson Pollock types who you can just see their work getting better and better?
Well, I think the local average treatment effects stuff, that Josh Angrist and Hito Imbens, partly won the Nobel Prize for. I think that's a real breakthrough, right? I mean, that it's not as if they didn't invent the potential outcomes framework,
Yeah.
but kind of that leap where the treatment status has two potential outcomes as well, based on the assignment of the instrument. It's ex post, it's such a simple, neat idea, but it was I think a big breakthrough of that kind of aha moment.
Yeah.
I've never I should have you asked them about that, like,
Yeah.
is this?
Yeah. He
Okay,
said
I figured
Chamberlain.
you.
They said Gary Chamberlain's the one that suggested that, doing the
Yeah.
potential
No,
treatment.
that's right. In fact, they even, I believe, footnote that in the paper.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, he
Or
said
mentioned in the paper.
Inben said they had this index model originally, and it was like very complicated with a lot of integrals. And then when they saw the potential treatment status, it just all simplified a lot easier.
Yeah.
Well, so what's a classic econometrician who you would say, yeah, like they just kept getting they just over time just got so interesting and as they got older.
Uh-oh.
A return to experience person.
so you think some people might take offense at that? Because does that sound
I
like
don't know. I don't know.
you're
I mean, if
labeling them
it's
as someone
like,
who's a like a slogger or
yeah,
something?
exactly. Yeah, maybe. Well, those
I don't know. Do I
you could
I
say these
probably
are.
shouldn't.
Uh,
Um,
well, is
I
there like
mean,
a? Is there some? Are there? Is there
so
something? Go ahead.
so I could maybe just talk out loud about this. So if we go back to my former thesis advisor, Hal White, who
Mm,
was working in the early 80s on the heteroscedasticity, robust standard errors, and the misspecified maximum likelihood stuff.
yeah.
There is, there's a bit of an aha moment there as well, I think. But it's also true that I think he was training himself in asymptotic theory at that time. And so it was that kind of continued training with kind of understanding, things from probability, like
Right.
how iterated expectations works, and that's and then just kind of bringing all of that knowledge together.
Mm,
And then he kind of saw that we in the sense of the profession had been approaching the problem of getting robust standard errors incorrectly,
mm,
and that there was actually a very simple way to think about this. And once you kind of boiled it down to simple asymptotics, it became a fairly simple problem.
yeah. Cool. Well, so you are in high school. Going back, I jumped ahead into the
Yeah, that's
future,
okay. There,
but
nothing interesting happens between,
well, so when do you decide what is your first exposure to economics before I'm curious. Is there something that you
Yeah,
kind
so
of
yeah, that's a really good question. So I went to a quite large high school. I mean, by the standards of, so I think it probably maybe uh, 820 in my graduating class. So multiply that by 4, and we're up to about 3,300, I guess. But we didn't have a course in economics. We didn't actually have any AP courses either in anything. So
mm,
I would hear kids in my so we had one calculus course, which, it was natural that people who showed, some aptitude in math were going to take their senior year. And I remember hearing some of the kids talk about economics, and I knew what it was, but I didn't really know what it was as an academic field at
yeah,
all.
right.
But when I went to so then I went to college at Berkeley, because it happened to be the closest university.
Mm,
So I was quite fortunate in one of those, location
right.
serendipity things where I just happened to be within commute distance of a great university.
What
And
year is that?
1978 is when I
Oh,
started
okay.
at Cal, and so fortunately the BART trains, the Bay Area Rapid Transit, had just opened pretty recently, so I was able to commute from Concord to Berkeley my first year.
Oh, wow.
And I was pretty much, it was a great deal back then. There was no tuition. There were some fees, but there was no tuition, and it was quite a bit easier to get in than compared with the
It
competition
was
now,
still
believe me.
it was an excellent
But
school.
it was an excellent school, but you could get in without great standardized test scores, as it turns out.
Mm,
And so it was really my father who was pushing me to major in business, because he was all in favor of going to college. This
yeah,
is one thing he wanted for us, but I think for him it was, you do this so you can get a better job,
get a better
right? So you can,
job, right?
and
Because
so
he,
what makes sense is to get a degree in business administration or something
yeah,
like that. Now,
right,
of course, along the way, if you do that to get into the business college, you have to take an economics course,
yeah.
you have to take statistics, you have to take computer science, and
Hmm.
you know
Oh, you had to
these
take computer
things.
science?
Yeah, so there was an intro computer science type course, and
Wow.
once I did that, that really, so I got hooked actually on computer science and economics, which I wound up double majoring in.
Oh,
So
because of the because you were doing what
yeah,
you were sort of taking
that's
your dad's
basically,
advice.
so I have my dad to thank for that, because if I had, to tell, if I had chosen something like history or political science. And it wasn't obvious. I mean, I was a bit burnt out on the math thing coming out of high school
Mm,
because, I had been just, always in the high level math class. And I could see, that I was not close to the best in the class in
right.
math. And so, business sounded okay, right? I mean, it sounded like, okay, I can handle that math, but I didn't, you know, think I would take an economics course and fall in love with it. And same with computer science. And I
Mm,
did. And so I started thinking about it, and, I guess I was becoming, I mean, that's this probably the only sense in which I've ever been a bit rebellious, as I, told my dad. I said, I don't really want to major in business. I want to, I like these two things, and I'm going to try to double major in them and see if I can do it. And
yeah.
so I was able to do it. And
Was
along the way, of course, that meant, taking math and statistics.
yeah.
And so I loaded up on those courses
Right. Right.
as well.
What professors really made an impression on you when you were at Berkeley? Was McFadden
So
there?
the McFadden was not there at the time, actually. So the kind of interesting thing about Berkeley is that you do actually see lots of adjuncts, sometimes graduate students, sometimes assistant professors in the classroom. And so I actually didn't have a lot of courses by the bigger name economists there, but the one that clearly made the most it had the most impact was when I took the PhD econometrics course from Tom Rothenberg in my
Mm,
last year at Cal. And that
mm,
I'd actually, so it's funny because in the statistics department, I actually took a two quarter course from Lucien Lecomte, the famous French probabilist
mm.
who got inserted into our course. And so we had this course with this you know this incredible mind, and he was teaching to 6 people or something like that. It was
Yeah.
really, at a place like Berkeley, that was really a treat. But it was Tom Rothenberg, when I, as an undergraduate, took his PhD course and did well in it. And then he kind of started, you know, working with me to basically try to figure out where I could go to graduate school given my low GRE scores. This is a continuing theme, you know, not especially high IQ, not very good SATs, not very good GREs, but
Yeah.
I'm fortunate, in very fortunate, to be able to move on to the next level still,
Right.
because
Right.
largely on my performance in the classroom.
That's interesting. So you're doing extraordinarily well in a PhD level econometric
Yes.
course at Berkeley as an undergrad, but you're struggling in the standardized test. What is that?
That
Why is it
sums
such
it up in a
it's a
nutshell. I
noisy
don't
measure?
know. I mean, I don't know. I can tell you, when I had to go to Tom Rothenberg's, he's emeritus now, but when I went to his office and had to tell him my GRE score, I think he had a hard time kind of expressing shock, actually.
Well, it's a
But
noisy measure.
but then he was he's a very realistic, down to earth guy. And the next
Mm,
thing was, well, where could you go to graduate school and get funding? That was the next step.
mm, mm. So did you come away from that PhD class thinking it's not just that I want to be an economist, I want to be an econometrician? Or do you even think in those terms? Do you think in terms
I
of like,
did. No.
you did?
So in fact, it was econometrics or bust for me at that point.
Mm,
Okay. So now it's not that I didn't enjoy my other economics courses. I did. I took macro from Laura Tyson. I took
mhm.
IO from Drew Fudenberg. I
Oh,
took
wow.
labor from Bill Dickens. And so they were all these younger, I think all assistant professors at the time. And so I did like those, but it was the combination of, the computer science degree, the statistics, the math, and then taking that econometrics course really
Mm,
brought it all together for me. So in fact, when Rothenberg suggested that I go to UC San Diego, he said, now they're really good in econometrics and theory. They're getting better in other fields, but they don't have a lot of people working in those fields yet. So, are you really sure you want to do
oh, right.
econometrics?
So if you
And
go to San Diego, you really are you've kind of, you're not hedging.
Yeah, I mean, people did other things, and
I mean, you are
I
hedging. I guess
actually
it's a great program. So you're going to a great program, but it's like you're going to be going to become an econometrician.
that's basically, that was in my mindset for sure.
Yeah. Wow.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Sorry. So you go and you get in.
And I get in, and not only that, I get a nice fellowship.
Oh,
Basically, and I've heard things recently that basically they called up Tom Rothenberg and said,
they were like,
"Hey,
"Are
hey,
you sure you
what's
got this guy's?"
hey, what's with this guy? What's with the GRE scores?" But you're writing this letter about him, and so, but they, again, to my great fortune, they got me this really nice fellowship, and then, of
Mm.
course, after that, I was a teaching assistant for the last couple of
Were
years.
you wanting to stay in California, or was it at that point? It
Yeah,
really was
that's a
just more
really good
career.
question. No, I wasn't really wanting to stay. It was more like, I mean, so, the choice, Rothenberg was basically saying, like, well, maybe you could get into MIT, but you're not going to get any funding. And I said, well,
Ah,
that's out of the question. So it was basically more like, what gave me the best chance to
mm,
be funded my first couple of years without
mm,
question. And
right.
so, no, it's true that I had rarely traveled outside California, like, and never east of Arizona. So
Hmm.
I hadn't been anywhere outside the West Coast
Hmm.
even when I graduated from college, actually.
Mm. Well, uh, so you go to San Diego. What were you expecting that first year to be like? Did you have any idea?
So I have to admit that, having done well in the PhD
Yeah.
course at Berkeley gave me some confidence, right?
Hmm.
But I also knew that San Diego's program back then, especially, it was very technical. In fact, the first quarter of classes consisted of multivariate, multivariable calculus optimization,
Hmm.
uh, matrix algebra. That was the statistics course, and then there was a macro course. But it was all kind of pure math, except two of the three courses. And so I thought that I probably would find that appealing,
Yeah.
given my thinking at the time, and my record coming out of Berkeley. And I did find it very appealing, actually.
Mm,
Um, and they skipped me out of the first year of econometrics based on my performance in the course at Berkeley. So
mm.
so I started in the second year in econometrics, and then also sat in on the first year courses just to make sure, that I was not missing out on anything. And that way it let me kind of hang out more with the cohort of students I came in with.
Who are the econometricians that were there that you were learning from at that
So,
time?
again, it was just this amazing opportunity because Hal White was there. And so this is now 1982. His heteroscedasticity robust paper had come out in 1980. His maximum likelihood estimation of misspecified models had come out in 82. And
Mm.
so there I am arriving at this moment. And then there are two future Nobel Prize winners there as well, Rob Engel and Clive Granger,
Wow.
doing there.
Are they
So
all assistant professors? Is White an
no,
Mhm.
actually, so um, Hal, I guess he was probably an associate at the time. Engel and
Mm.
Granger were full professors at that time.
Oh, okay.
And
Okay.
they were just starting the co-integration stuff.
They were
Was
just starting it.
they were it was in working paper form. I
Wow.
remember actually remember seeing a working papers that said, do not circulate without permission, that sort of thing, and saw
Huh.
some seminars. And it was above me at the time. But
Yeah.
by the time I left, I pretty much knew. And Engel then was working on his arch stuff,
Mm.
his classic autoregressive conditional heteroscedasticity paper came out in 1982
Mm.
also. And I actually got in on a project with him and someone in my cohort, Tim Ballerslev, and we published this joint paper together.
Wow. Did you get a feeling that I mean, like when you're a fish in water, you don't know you're in water. So, like, did you sort of feel like, wow, I'm in the middle of something unique, historically, or is it just like everything I'm learning is new, and so you don't know exactly what is going to be the stuff that, I mean, like that heteroscedasticity stuff that had just come out. I mean, did you have a sense of its importance when you were younger, like when you were there?
Yeah, I could fib, I guess, and say, oh yeah, I could see Nobel Prizes on the horizon and how, this would become the standard in computing standard errors. But I think it was more like, yeah, in the first couple of years, you're just kind of, you know, taking it all in. And I didn't have any real basis for comparison, right? Back
Mm,
then, they didn't really. I mean, Hal was pretty good at pushing me along to try to, get me going on research, but it's still, as a general rule, we were still focused more on our coursework. And
mm,
I was doing some things with Hal, early on, but you can't, how do you know? I mean,
right.
I wasn't at MIT, I wasn't at Yale, I wasn't at Harvard,
Yeah.
Chicago. So you don't know what's going on,
Right.
other places. And it turned,
Right.
of course, there was a lot of very interesting stuff going on at those places as well.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Well, I mean, what do you think the value, you think about like people in education always write about value added. What do you, if you, I mean, it's all counterfactual, so you don't really know what, but what do you think is like, was the investments that San Diego at that time made in you that really changed you? How would you have been different if you had gone to, I mean, I'm just asking you to make this up, but like,
Yeah,
what would
no,
have been
I
different
mean,
somewhere else?
it had, so when I went there sight unseen, right, without visiting San Diego first, I just said, this is my basically my I had two options, to stay at Berkeley or go to San Diego, and I
Mm-hmm.
was being pushed to go to, so I just went down there, and the graduate secretary told me on the first day that, Hal White wants to see you on Monday. And by the way, you're not going to be taking the first year class, you're going to be taking the second year class,
Mm,
and you're going to be Hal White's TA. And so Hal kind of, he took me under his wing right away, and he,
mm,
got me doing hard things that pushed me, like grading problem sets for second year econometrics,
mm.
as a first year student. And
Yeah.
so it's hard to think. I mean, when you go into a top five program, let's face it, I mean, back then, especially, the competition is, you have all these people who are going to be getting the attention of professors. And I think when Hal, was kind of taking that PhD course at Berkeley and doing well in it, and then I got basically Hal's full attention for a couple of years, and I
Yeah.
don't, that had a huge effect on me.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And it's not that, the stuff that I was doing back then is that closely related to what I do now, but it did give me a toolkit for sure to feel
Right.
comfortable going
Right.
forward.
I wonder what they must have really been. I mean, the people that were in charge of admissions, clearly that GRE score, they clearly were able to interpret your application very clear. I mean, not only do they let you in, but they give you this fellowship. They let you skip a year. So, I mean, you think that was Rothenberg was just really able to communicate your potential really well in the letter?
I think he had a lot to do with it. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, I think it's probably, as you kind of, I think, alluded to earlier, I mean, you didn't allude to it, you stated it as, I'm doing well in this PhD level econometrics course and getting mediocre GRE scores at the same time. So that
Mm-hmm.
probably is a bit strange. And so
Mm-hmm.
then I guess they had to decide where to put the most weight,
Mm.
right?
Yeah. It's incredible. I mean, it's so important. It's the people that are in charge of admissions in the PhD programs have to figure out how to read tea leaves. Lots of times.
Yes.
Sometimes, I mean, or maybe a lot
I,
of times.
I mean, there was it's true also. I was double majoring in two hard
Right.
majors, and
Yeah.
I had done well in, advanced computer science courses too. So it's not as if
Hmm.
there wasn't any
Any
other
information. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
information, but
Right.
whatever, taking, a homework assignment home in computer science where you have to write a complicated program, that's
Right.
a different skill from sitting down and seeing, solving math problems
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
rapid succession. And that's just something I guess I've never really mastered. So,
Well, so you end up getting your first gig is at MIT, right? That's where
mhm,
that's your place.
mhm.
That must have been, what did you feel like when you got that offer from MIT?
Yeah, so what's really interesting is that I actually visited a semester at MIT at the beginning of my third year as a PhD student because Hal White went on leave there, and he said, this is, an important time for you. Why don't you, come with me on leave? And so basically
Wow.
that was my first trip out of the West Coast, and I actually drove from San Diego first to Raleigh, North Carolina, and then up to Cambridge.
Oh, fun.
That,
That
that's
sounds
kind of
fun.
an interesting story, um, so I, met people around there,
Yeah.
and I met, a lot of the graduate students, and they were really kind to me, and
Mm.
I gave lunchtime seminars, and talked to some of the faculty. And so when a couple of years later I had that offer, yeah, it just seemed very natural to me. And
Wow.
I felt like, a lot of places would have been a good fit for me, but that one was just, based on my previous experience, was the obvious one for me. Not to mention, it's one of the top, few economics departments. So,
Yeah, it's
um,
historic. It's incredible. That's just, I mean, I bet your advisors were, what do you think? How did Hal respond to you getting a tenure track offer from MIT coming out of San Diego? I mean, he must have been so proud of you.
so Hal's PhD was from MIT, and
Oh,
his advisor was Jerry Hausman.
oh,
So Hal was actually, his dissertation is in labor economics, actually,
oh,
and
okay.
um, he, you know, trained himself as an econometrician. Basically, he became interested in estimation problems. So,
Oh,
I mean, Hal kind of, I think it's kind of funny because um, he just kind of took it matter of factly, I guess,
really?
like, yeah, like this is what I expected of you or something like that. So that was pretty flattering, actually. In a way, it
Yeah.
was a bit scary as well, but
Well, what was it like being an assistant professor? That was like what, mid 80s? So it was like
so
85,
yeah,
86.
86 is when I started there, and it
Mm.
was it's a great place, actually. It still is. It was then, I mean, for a lot of reasons, but to be an assistant professor there was really something. Now I have to say, it was a bit intimidating to teach those students. If you could go through those classes that I taught, and I guarantee you would recognize a, a very high percentage of the names of the students in these classes, right? I mean, these people have had, and not in econometrics, right? They're all over the place, in various fields, and in macro, in finance, and labor, public, and so on. And so it was one of these things where trying to keep one step ahead of the students.
Yeah, sure. I bet. I bet.
And it's good to be pushed by them, actually, to
Yeah.
know that they're going to keep you honest, and you're not going to be able to gloss over things or get things wrong, and act like you didn't get them wrong. They're going to pick up on that.
Did you have role models like when you stepped foot at MIT and you were an assistant professor? Were there like economists that you thought my 20-year plan and like you have like a 1 year, 5 year, 20-year plan? Maybe you do or don't, but like
Yeah.
you have these plans, and it just seems like for me, I have plans and I inevitably think of other people. I just inevitably think that's kind of like what they did, and that's kind of what they did, and I'll just kind of watch what they did and learn from them. Were there like role models that you sort of had in your mind that you were looking up to when you stepped foot at MIT as assistant
Yeah,
professor?
that's a great question. So I can answer it maybe like this. So my dissertation was really technical. Like I was proving, central limit theorems for time series processes,
Mm.
consistency, asymptotic normality for kind of abstract estimation problems. And, that was fun intellectually. It was rewarded back then, I think. But it really wasn't going to have much of an impact on empirical research. So one of the things about going to MIT is now you see people like Jerry Hausman and Dan
Mm.
McFadden, and you see that not only are they premier econometricians, but
Hmm.
they're excellent economists too. And
Mm.
they kind of know about the bottom line, right? And the bottom line is to try to help people do better data analysis. And
Right.
I have to mention Gary Chamberlain too, because he was at Harvard, but there
Yeah.
were, we had these, and Gary was just really good to me. I mean,
Mm.
he kind of, you know, um, I started working on problems which were more, Chamberlain-esque, I guess, which comes with its risks, of course, because you can't do anything better than Gary Chamberlain. That's
Right.
one thing I
Right.
learned. But he was always, very complimentary and encouraging. And we had interactions not just at the formal seminar, but also at lunchtime gatherings and
Mm.
so on.
Yeah, he
So
seems like he was really good to a lot of you
he really
junior
was. Yeah,
econometricians.
he
Hito and
was.
Josh Ingers speak really highly of him too. What was it?
Yes.
What was he doing? He was just paying attention and invest.
He was paying, yeah, he would actually, he would actually look at papers and give comments.
and
And
give comments on him.
and of course he was he could be that giving a seminar in front of that joint group was so. And Whitney Newey became my colleague later on there.
Mm.
So you'd be sitting in this room with Jerry Hausman, Gary Chamberlain, McFadden, Whitney Newey, right? And
Yeah.
yeah, and Jim Stock, and so all these people are there, and you're
So it
trying
was
to.
so Cambridge was kind of a in that early '90s, late '80s. It was a really vibrant community for econometricians.
Really vibrant, yes.
Yeah.
It's like I said, my transition from kind of a technical time series econometrician to more of a applied microeconometrician, although maybe that applied part took a little longer, was, I think, influenced a lot by being in that area.
Well, you had this tweet that you tweeted a couple of days ago. You said, "It's time to be honest with myself. I'm an applied econometrician. Not that
Yes.
there's anything wrong with that." And I think to a lot of people, when they hear Jeff Wooldridge say that, they don't understand what that means because you've written so much theoretical econometrics, and so I'm just curious, like within econometrics, what is this distinction that you're describing?
So I guess maybe it's a distinction. And of course I'm partly just trying to get a reaction, right?
Yeah, sure.
But I think it's this thing where I'm being asked to referee papers. I go to seminars, and it just, to kind of dive into some of the current work in econometrics is just quite difficult for me, mathematically. Like, just if what you're trying to do is say, here are these assumptions, here's this result, and now try to evaluate whether you think it's true. Can you verify the proof? And when I compare it with my own current work, I don't use anything other than just standard asymptotic. So the asymptotic theory, this is so mundane that there's no reason to even bother writing down technical assumptions. And so I think within the realm of econometrics,
Mm.
that could, reasonably be called applied econometrics. I've, based on referee reports I've gotten and so on, there's kind of
Right,
that
right. Oh, that's interesting.
suggestion as well. But I shouldn't offend people who I might call who are true empirical economists as well as being applied econometricians, right? And so I'm more theoretical than most of those people, not all,
Mm-hmm.
but most of those people. But then again, I don't really have a field in economics, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I can't really call myself an empirical economist.
Mm-hmm.
slash applied econometrician.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, in the old, it's not clear what being an applied econometrician actually is.
Mm-hmm.
Either you're an econometrician who, can publish in Econometrica and all these places, or uh, you know, you are doing serious empirical work. And then there's me who's doing, now I've been fortunate to work with some really good co-authors, who are expanding the field in interesting ways, as well. But in terms of my own, I'm talking about kind of my own single authored research.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty applied, I would say.
Right, right, right. This new work that you've done on design based inference, I feel like this word design, before we even get started, I feel like I never heard it. And then I started hearing it, this the word being used as an adjective, and I had never heard it before. And so before we even kind of get started, I just was wondering, what exactly does design mean statistically? Where does it fit in the history of like econometrics and statistics?
So the ideas go way back, to Neyman's, that you've seen this paper, probably this 1923 paper
Yeah.
cited by Neyman. And the idea is, in the simplest case, just think of observing an entire population. So,
Mm-hmm.
right. So you have all the units in the population, and now and you're doing just a simple, causal inference problem. And in fact, assume that it's, a randomized controlled trial, just to make it simple.
Mm-hmm.
And but you have the whole population. And then so the question is, if you go back to the intro statistics or intro econometrics view of the world, where
Mm-hmm.
we start by assuming we have a random sample from the population, and
Mm-hmm.
this is how you do your inferences, is how, from that, that perspective, you think about, that's the randomness is coming through the sampling from the population. You don't observe the whole population. And now, there are ways then to compute a standard error, to compute a confidence interval. But now suppose you have the entire population. How
Yeah.
are you going to introduce uncertainty into the problem?
So
And
like if you so there was all this advantages statistically when you were sampling because of all this
yes,
theory that you got from it. And then all of a sudden we live in 2022 where we live with all the data all the time.
or at least we don't necessarily have all the data, but we have other issues that are coming up. For
Mm-hmm.
example, how is the design is refers to the key explanatory variables, the key causal variables that you're interested in, right?
Mm-hmm.
So again, in the simplest case, there's just this binary, treatment indicator. And so it's not necessarily true that that's the only source of uncertainty. You could still have sampling uncertainty as well. But
Right.
now the question is, depending on
But these are
how
like
the
different,
assignment is made, these are completely
these are
different things.
completely different
Yes,
like
that's
sources
exactly
of
right.
uncertainty. And
That's
is
correct.
it the case like that for some reason over I mean my reading of stats is that we began to move towards deeper and deeper ideas of sampling. So like you would just have like super populations and these infinite
Yes.
populations that you would sample from, but it was still this core concept of I'm observing units, they're real units, they're just randomly pulled from some other
Yes.
population. And
Yes.
then there's all these tools that are based on that.
Yes. And I
And
think
that's
that's
different
still,
than Neiman.
considering my books rely heavily on the random sampling concept, I certainly don't want to throw that out, because I do think that, because when you have random sampling from a very large, or quote infinite population,
Yeah.
large enough so that the sample is small relative to the population, that
Mm-hmm.
allows us to study things like identification in the
Mm-hmm.
population without having to worry about, how does this sampling affect it. And then once you understand the identification problem in the population, now
Mm-hmm.
you have this sample that's representative of the population, and now you can turn your identification results into estimators. Okay, but but now, and so that allows you to say, well, now what happens if we have some sort of stratified sampling scheme? Okay,
Mm,
do we lose identification of the population parameters because we no longer have a random sample? What happens if we have a cluster sampling scheme, right? And so it, I think from the sampling perspective, it does make sense to say, let's think about what's going on in the population, and let's think about the sample, but then that doesn't cover cases where you actually observe the entire population. And
right.
it doesn't cover cases where you may be, the assignment of the key policy variable isn't isn't independent across units, right? So this raises the issue of you have some sort of clustered assignment in some sort of policy intervention where individual units aren't assigned independently, but they're assigned either together as a group to be in the controller treated, or there's at least some correlation in the assignment within particular groups. And
Hmm.
that last thing is the topic of the Abadi, Athey, Imbens, Wooldridge uh, paper that I think you're alluding to. You
Well,
can
there's two, right? There's the Econometrica and there's
Yes,
the
yes.
CQJ.
So the first one came about because we didn't we wanted to dive right into the clustering problem, and then realized that there was a lot to say about the case with independent sampling still.
How did this paper come about? How do you guys, how y'all are at three different locations?
So
So what, but so why are y'all even?
yeah, so part of it is I think it's I mean I think Hito Imbens is kind of the 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 force here, just because of course he's co-authored with Susan, he's co-authored with Alberto, and he's co-authored with me, and we taught these courses together
Right.
at the NBR in the
Yeah.
late 2000s. And so that led to some discussions, and he was having discussions with Alberto and Susan as well. So it seemed to make sense that,
Mm.
and in fact, I can remember then Alberto and we team taught a course in Italy, Bertinoro, and we were talking about some of this is back in, I think, 2011,
Yeah.
2012, something like that. And so it took kind of a long time to pull it all together, but
Mm.
we took a step back from the clustering issue to say, let's forget about that, and let's see if we can come up with a framework that provides a nice bridge between the traditional random sampling case and the case where you might actually observe the entire population. And so
Mm.
the formulas there, these are papers that required working out the asymptotics carefully, because it
Mm.
was, you know, you could pull things from various places, but it was new, that the entire framework. And so,
It's new, right? This is sort of a new framework. I mean, even
yeah,
though
it,
you've
it's
got
the
going back to Neiman and stuff,
that's right. So
it
so
feels
there,
like you're creating something a little bit original by
yeah.
bringing
So
it all together.
it's the bringing it all together, because of course the case of design-based inference, where you see the whole population, that does have a long history in
Hmm.
statistics. And of course, statisticians have spent a lot of time on sampling issues as well, but kind of bringing it together and then showing that when you are really sampling, you have a random sample, a relatively small random sample from a large population, then
Hmm.
it's true the usual Eicher, Huber, White standard errors are valid, but we also allow you to go all the way to the other end where there is no sampling error because you observe the entire population. But
Hmm.
the uncertainty is due to this counterfactual, right?
Right.
This person was assigned to the control, but they could have been assigned to the treatment. Okay.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's where the uncertainty comes from in the extreme case.
Hmm. Is this going to be useful to people that don't do RCTs though?
Yes, because in the Econometrica paper, for example, we do have explicitly a regression framework where we have
Mm.
controls, and so we actually it's useful there to think about the sources of uncertainty as being, setting aside the sampling error,
Hmm.
being the variables that you really care about, right? Like
Uh-huh.
if you're looking at the effect of a change in minimum wage laws, then that's what you want to do the counterfactual on. But if you're controlling for other things like demographics about the state, geographic location, you're not really interested in those. So you don't do counterfactuals over those. You just say these are these fixed attributes that we want to control for. So
Yeah.
you can control for things just like you can in the more traditional setting.
Yeah. Well, so did you guys make code for this? Feels like that's how stuff becomes important.
Yeah, so
Econometrics.
actually on that for that paper, I posted something not too long ago on my shared Dropbox actually that
Uh-huh.
shows how you can do it. I'm always into, trying to get standard packages. In my case, it's Stata,
Yeah.
to do these things. So it's all and I remember a while back on Twitter, when we were having this exchange about Frischwa and
Yeah.
the useful results, you can use the Frischwa stuff to do a partialing out to get these standard errors. And then
Mm,
the idea is, as you get closer and closer to seeing the whole population, the adjustment factor, of course, to the standard errors is going to make more and more of a difference because
mm,
you're getting rid of the sampling uncertainty.
mm.
And
Well,
so it's pretty easy to adjust things actually.
what was the hardest part of these projects with these three people? What was the hardest part of it? Like the intellectually or whatever that made it like really
For me
challenging.
personally,
Yeah.
keeping up with those three
They're,
actually
they're,
is
they're impressive. Yeah.
yeah, I mean that's stating the obvious, of
Right.
course. Their history and records speak for themselves, but I guess I think there some the asymptotics in the clustering paper were very difficult. The But there are conceptual issues too, right? I think the breakthrough of you know we can include this case of pure sampling error, um, and the case of where you don't have any sampling error in the same framework. I think is the big breakthrough. And then
Mm,
after that, you kind of look for either you kind of start off with brute force ways of establishing results, and then you see some simplifications that can happen. And
yeah.
watching watching my co-authors kind of have insights was good for me for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, uh, just a couple more things, and then we're at the top of the hour, and I gotta let you go. But textbooks. So writing books, you've written two really classic textbooks. In graduate school, we would use your panel and cross section book, but for the prelim, we would also use what we called Baby Wooldridge.
Yes.
I don't know. I just thought we called it that, and then on Twitter, everybody would say Baby Wooldridge. It's like somehow
I've
this
heard
is
I've
this is
heard this.
everyone.
Yes.
Yeah, it's
Right.
very fondly called that. I was wondering, why did you decide to write those?
Yeah, so I have to give credit for the encouragement to write the MIT Press book to my colleague Peter Schmidt, who, when I first
Mm,
came to Michigan State, he said, here's this course that it looks like would be really good for you to teach. And it was, the kind of nonlinear panel course with panel data and so on. And so, and at one point, after I had been at MSU for a little while, he said, you should really, write a book doing all of this stuff with vertical bars in the way you do it. And vertical bars means with conditional expectations. And what he's kind of comparing that to is the way we used to do things with fixed regressors, and then
right.
and then suddenly the regressors are no longer fixed, they're
Yeah.
random, but they're correlated with the error. And that always seemed, the disconnect there, I think, at least caused me confusion when I was first
Mm,
learning that material. So then I started writing, I've always written slides and things for the course. In fact, the notes for the course, for the book, started actually back at MIT when I was teaching some of the nonlinear stuff back at MIT, and then continued on at MSU. And I was approached by somebody at MIT Press some time ago, and he saw me give a presentation at a meeting and said, the way you present things, it looks like you might be, somebody who can write in a way. And so it all kind of came together
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
way. Yeah. And then the intro book, you know, I I think when I was, really getting interested in going to graduate school as an undergraduate, I started thinking, being a professor's got to be the greatest job. I was just looking around at the professors at Berkeley, and I just really liked, and I thought that, teaching was would be my main focus, and
Yeah.
so that naturally wanted me to write things like textbooks. And there again, it's the right person asking, in a
Mm.
sense. And I thought I could do something that was different, than the existing books, and that doesn't mean it's better. That doesn't mean people are going
Yeah.
to embrace it, but it turned out a lot of people like the approach
Yeah.
that I
Which
took.
one came first? The PhD book came
So
first?
no, actually, I signed the contract and started working on the intro one first, but then shortly after that, I signed with MIT Press, and I was actually
Oh.
working on them more or less at the same time. Where
Oh.
you could kind of do one and then take a break from it and then do the other one.
It's
As I've
so
told,
what's been the so I mean, what was the what was the I mean, they're both kind of like dominant position, it seems like. I don't know sales or anything, but it just seems like it's Stock and Watson or Wooldridge usually is what I see people kind of picking between. And I just was wondering, when you first wrote it though, what what was sort of the market share that you sort of knew of?
so I think the most popular book was probably Gujarati's book, maybe
Right.
at the
Yep.
time. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I wrote that. I actually had signed with the company back then. It's now with Cengage, but it was Southwestern Publishing, and I was supposed to write a lower level version of that intro book, but it never happened. And in fact, probably because the other book was, successful, that the publisher became less interested and I became less interested. But I was told by the person who signed me that he said, first you should write the book that you want to write, that, just flows out kind of naturally, and then we can talk about, things like market share later on. But
Mhm.
that second part never actually happened.
Yeah.
But I knew like I said, hanging around MIT, I didn't just go to the econometric seminars, I went to lots of applied seminars. When you listen to applied people discuss their work and how they think of econometric methods, it just seems so different from the way undergraduate books were teaching the subject. And so,
Mhm.
nobody starts their wage equation by saying, let's treat the x's on the right hand side as fixed. Nobody said. I
Mhm.
mean, the discussion immediately launches into, do you have good enough controls, or do you have a convincing instrumental variable? And all
Mhm.
of this is couched in the language of correlation, right? Endogeneity and so it just seemed to me that teaching this kind of old framework
Mhm.
had lost its usefulness. Right? And
Yours was the first one to kind of move in that direction, move away from the fixed regressors. I didn't realize that. Maybe it was, or like it was one of.
so I need to go. Yeah, I haven't done. Yeah, I mean, you've mentioned, right, that you're interested in you're teaching a course in
Yeah,
history
history
of
of thought.
economic
Yeah.
thought, right?
Yeah.
We should have a course. There should be a course in history of econometric thought, right?
I know. I know. I
Somebody
was.
should. So I don't know that for. So it's clearly true. Like, for example, I can tell you a book that does. Arthur Goldberger actually
Right.
starts from, in his book, he starts from, it's a PhD level book, but he does start with random regressors. I
Mm.
will say the book kind of leaves that, somewhat early on to, be able to kind of make the arguments,
Is Amemia's
when you,
book? I own Amemia's book, but I don't.
so Amemia, yes, that's a good question. I would have thought of that as a more I mean, I was thinking at the introductory level.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So not so, and my MIT Press book, one of the funny things about it is it was never really intended to be a first year text. It was really intended for these kind of the second
Got
year
it.
course that
Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
was teaching. But anyway, so
Mm-hmm.
people are free to use it however they want, of course.
Right. So that was yeah. So the for the undergraduate, that was the push that you were. I guess you're not really, yeah, you're not like saying this is the undergraduate book. It's just this was aiming for a different audience and that was the one that was pushing for random
Yeah,
regressors.
yeah, it was just kind of to introduce this notion where you could start talking about causality early on, and
Mm,
the idea of ceteris paribus, have you controlled for enough? And it's very tough to do that with fixed
it's
regressors, just
hard to do it with
because.
fixed
Yeah,
regressors because
yeah,
they're the idea of the correlation is harder or
yeah,
something.
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Oh, I see. Oh, so
But
they
but I mean,
what
in
were
in a
they
way,
doing then?
but the other thing that I did is I decided that really, it was important to learn about multiple regression in the simplest setting, and that means random sampling. And
Mm,
books before that had kind of just mushed it all together, and so
right.
so you could kind of have this. I can allow everything to be a random draw from the population. That was the setting, right? And then that connects directly with what students learn in intro statistics, which is random sampling as
Mm,
the key sampling paradigm. And so
right.
it kind of seemed that kind of natural transition. And
Yeah.
then of course you can talk about time series and panel data and so on
Yeah.
once that's
Yeah.
been done. Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, what about at the graduate level? What was the book at the graduate level that you think probably when you first started your career writing the graduate book, what do you think it supplanted?
So yeah, that's a good question.
Because we used green a lot.
Yeah, so I would say Green's book is definitely intended to start in the first semester and
Mm,
to go all the way through. And I just thought, I would think, there's been this first semester course at least, and then
mm-hmm,
probably one semester. That's the way we do it at MSU, is
mm-hmm.
probability and stats, kind of a standard linear models course, and then I teach my course in the second year with the MIT Press book. So I'm not sure there was really. So I guess it probably meant that people would reevaluate what they would use in the advanced, like microeconometrics courses. It seemed to me like, instead of just having these general frameworks that were supposed to apply to all data structures,
Right.
cross-section panel, that the profession was going more towards, here's a course that's mainly intended to train people who are interested in
Yeah.
empirical micro, and here's a time series course which is more for people in empirical macro and finance and so on.
Yeah. Well, so what's been the most rewarding part for you personally about writing books versus writing these research articles?
Yeah, I'm definitely much better known for my books than my research articles. People have actually told me that, to my, which is, um, a compliment of sorts, I guess. But it's, I have to admit, of course, there's a bit of ego involved here, where, I get invited to places, all over the world to give lectures and so on. And the students come up and, they, want to meet me and, say they like my books and so on. And so, but kind of generally to think that people do seem to cite the books in their empirical research, right? I mean, these books are written for empirical people.
Right.
There's nothing, like I said, even in the graduate level book, it's all once you have kind of mastered the basic probability of, expectations and
Yeah.
conditional so, and the law of large numbers, then it all flows pretty easily. It's
Yeah.
just putting it together in a certain way.
Yeah.
So, to know that people use the stuff from my book is the best part.
Yeah, right. Well, I really appreciate you giving me an hour of your time. It's really wonderful to get to walk through your life like this. I really enjoyed getting to talk.
Thanks. It was a lot of fun, Scott. Some things I've been thinking about, and some things you pulled out of me. By the way, congrats on getting the second edition of
Yeah,
the mixtape in the works. I
yeah,
know
in the
that's
works.
yeah.
Exactly.
So
Yeah,
yeah, no, I have things in the works too, right? So
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
quite sympathetic, man.
yeah. Good. Well, hey, well, I'll talk to you. I'll see you on Twitter, I'm sure.
Yeah. Okay. Take
Okay,
care,
bye-bye.
Scott.